So our next speaker today is Scott Newell, who is the Alfalfa Outreach Specialist with UW-Madison Division of Extension. And we're going to switch gears to alfalfa, and Scott's going to discuss the potential implications of our early season alfalfa challenges, which Dr. Gazer alluded to already. And he's going to share the importance of managing for persistence in alfalfa to improve and maximize overall productivity. And Scott, your slides look great, so we should be good to go.
All right, sounds good. And you can hear me okay? Great. So, yeah, as Liz said, for those who don't know me already, I'm Scott Newell. I'm the Alfalfa Outreach Specialist here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Division of Extension. And it's coming up on, well, I just finished about my first year here. So I've had a whirlwind of a first year with a very dry year and now a very wet year to work with. Before we get started here, I just want to say, as a disclaimer, I moved this weekend and I have a bit of a cold this morning. So if you see a picture fall down in the background, or if I need to mute to cough a little bit, don't worry, I'll still get all this information out to you. Just, we're making it work here. So what are we going to go through here today? So just, I really want to focus in on persistence here today. Like Liz said, what the effects of this current year are on our management outlook for alfalfa, and then a little bit of looking ahead as well. We want to be reactive in these discussions with Badger Crop Connect, but there's a few things that are on the horizon that I want us to keep a lookout for there. So we'll cover some of those topics as well. But first, just wanted to kind of go through how is this year going so far with alfalfa? So I think this picture sums up most people's spring. Very wet year. We had, standing water in fields. We had a lot of areas where, this spring we got a really nice early green up. We had a much warmer than average spring. Alfalfa was greening up early. It was a bit of a worry for a bit there, that we might have a winter kill event set in. Fortunately, we didn't really hear much report of that. And we were closing in on Labor Day in most places, or Memorial Day, and we had really lush alfalfa out in the fields, and it was looking like a great year. We had really high quality rocket fuel forage that was really tall, hadn't budded out yet. That was thanks to the cooler than average temperatures that we had in April. And then the rain came, and we went from having rocket fuel forage to, I think a lot of people, like John alluded to, didn't end up harvesting any higher than beef quality forage out of their first cutting. So spring was definitely a challenge for people this year with the rains delaying harvest across Wisconsin. And we had some widespread alfalfa weevil issues, which certainly didn't help with forage quality either by decimating some of the leaves on the hay that was remaining out there. So we've had a really challenging first cut there, and then that's sort of pushed with where I heard many express a desire to increase their forage quality in subsequent cuttings. So, it hasn't been an especially easy year to manage those subsequent cuttings either. Lately, it's been a little bit better, but generally speaking, it's been quite difficult to find some good haymaking days. But I heard many people say that they wanted to maybe push a sooner cutting schedule or a quicker cutting schedule to increase their forage quality in those subsequent cuttings and essentially blend up that lower quality alfalfa forage from the first cutting. So, when I think about alfalfa, I usually think not just about the current year, but because it's a perennial crop, I think about what the management decisions that we're making this year have in terms of an effect on subsequent years. So that brings me to this kind of main topic here. So what is persistence? So persistence of alfalfa, as I sort of define it, is, and this actually worked out very well in a talk that I was giving at the Fond du Lac County Forage Council with Liz Gartman. Someone in the audience said something to the effect of, now Scott's going to come talk about keeping your alfalfa stand for 5 to 7 years. And well, I think that's a lot of people's definition of alfalfa persistence. My definition of alfalfa persistence is more around keeping the stand as productive as possible for as long as you have the stand. So whether that's a 3-year stand or a 7-year stand, persistence is still an important piece. And I just want to kind of go through this management trade-off here real quick to illustrate for you why even in a 3 or a 4 year stand, persistence is still an important thing to care about in your stands. So really, persistence management of alfalfa is a trade-off between yield, quality, and persistence. So I think we all know, because we saw this year, that yield and quality are negatively correlated. So as yield goes up, quality tends to go down. Quality and persistence are negatively correlated as well, just because we're stressing the plant out more often to get that high quality forage. So that is affecting our persistence. And actually managing for yield and persistence, that green arrow there shows that if you're managing for yield, you're also managing for persistence, because you're leaving more time between cuttings to get that higher yield. And so you're going to see better persistence. But so let's just step through this here real quick. So if we were only managing for quality, what happens if we only manage for quality is we lose a bit of yield because of that negative correlation there. But also the following year, or in response to that management for only quality, you also lose a bit of persistence. So then in the following year, what happens when you've lost persistence and you lose some plants over that winter because they were more stressed, you have less total yield potential the following year. And if you continue to manage for quality, you get less yield, you get less persistence. The cycle goes on there if you only ever manage for quality. And I think that's important to bring up, that if your total yield potential is going down, your profitability is also going down. I heard many dairy nutritionists talk about the economics of dairy farming, and 50% of the cost of a dairy operation is from crop raising. For anyone who has harvested alfalfa, your cost to harvest doesn't go down if your yield is down. So your profitability goes up if you manage to increase your yield to hit the quality targets that you want. And a big part of that, I think, in maintaining profitability of a stand in the second and third year is maintaining that persistence. So having an eye towards that. Now, of course, management is always a trade-off. So we do still need high quality forage to feed into the ration. But we need to have some times of the year where we balance that management for quality with some management for persistence as well, so that in subsequent years, we have the highest profitability production that we can. The last thing that I'll throw in there is reasons to care about persistence is that you get a higher nutrient credit from your alfalfa if you have a better stand. So you can see here, this is our University of Wisconsin guidelines on the nutrient credits from alfalfa. And if you have a good stand, you get more in N credit than if you have a fair stand, than if you have a poor stand. So that increases your profitability beyond that alfalfa as well, to maintain a good stand, maintain that persistence. So what are the factors that affect persistence? Well, you have variety choice. You've got soil factors like the type, drainage, pH, and nutrient status, in-season and fall cutting management, winter stubble that you leave, as well as snow cover, and then, of course, individual winter conditions. So of those, the ones that we can really control in quick time periods, so we can control drainage and pH somewhat, but those are longer time scales usually. But quickly, we can manage nutrient status, in-season cutting management, fall season, and that winter stubble remaining. So I just wanted to go through kind of a few different research studies and case studies of alfalfa management for persistence and the effects of various management practices on the persistence of alfalfa. So before I get into that real quick, just an overview of what cutting management is doing for you. So it allows for winter acclimation of the plant. It allows a restoration of those root reserves. It can actually affect spring vigor the following year if you cut in a specific way, and that's something that we'll see in these case studies. And then also you can provide some regrowth to block the wind and catch some snow, which helps quite a bit for winter survival. As you can see, you've probably seen these charts before, but basically when you cut the alfalfa, your root carbohydrates immediately go down to support the regrowth. And then they start to accumulate back up again. And a good time to cut is back when they're fully restored. But generally speaking, that coincides over here with a time when forage quality has gone down. So you're sort of balancing these root reserves and the forage quality and the forage yield throughout the season. This is a bit of what I was showing in the beginning. Let's see, as far as, the final fall cutting, traditional wisdom says to avoid cutting 5 to 6 weeks prior to a hard frost being 25 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Here I've just picked out Fond du Lac County because Liz is on the call here today. But this is a really useful tool, this Purdue freeze date tool. And I believe if it hasn't already been put in the chat, I have a link tree that has links to all the various pieces of this presentation. And this is one of those in there. And this is a really useful tool to look at kind of average freeze dates for you. So like I said, traditional wisdom would be to leave about 5 to 6 weeks before that fall frost date or freeze date, hard freeze date. But of course, that's hard to predict. So what are some other things that that you could look for to manage persistence in alfalfa that aren't just that final fall cutting? So here we'll get into those case studies I was talking about. So the University of Minnesota did a fall cutting study on 3 and 4 cut systems with fall cutting in mid-September or October. They did this across 5 environments. And they saw little immediate effect of that fall cutting on the stand. So whether they harvested in mid-September or mid-October, they didn't see an immediate effect of fall cutting on the stand. But the cumulative effect of fall cutting did lead to a drop in stand persistence. But they also saw that doing a 3-cut system versus a 4-cut system, the 4-cut system had lower persistence as well. So they concluded that in-season cutting management had as much of an effect on persistence as that fall cutting. A lot of us pay more attention to fall cutting and look at that as kind of the main way that we manage persistence, but this in-season piece is another component of that as well. A North Dakota State University study it was 3 cuts with no fall harvest and a 4-cut that included a fall harvest. So that was the 3-cut plus a 4th fall harvest. They did this in true replicated places, and they had significant effect to stand density in some years from that fall cutting. The 4-cut system had higher yields on average, and the inclusion of a fall cutting decreased spring forage yield. So they actually saw increased fall forage yield if they didn't take that fall cutting, but they did see an effect from that fall cutting on persistence in the fall or in the spring of the following year. Minnesota and Wisconsin grower survey following a significant winter kill event in the spring of 2013 looked at a bunch of factors relating to what management practices people had done versus whether or not they had winter kill issues or not. So fall cut date, those that reported winter kill issues, actually 60% of them cut on a date that most people would consider to be fairly safe to cut on. September 1st, then September 15th had a few, October 1st had a few, but you can see that, that fall cut date didn't necessarily mean that you were not going to have winter kill susceptibility if you just cut that 5 to 6 weeks before the first hard freeze. Cutting frequency had, if you were in a 4-cut system versus a 3-cut system, you were more likely to have winter kill in that 4-cut system. And then fall regrowth was also showed a significant effect on winter kill prevalence. So if you had less fall regrowth, you were likely to have more winter kill in that significant winter kill event. And then lastly, kind of to put some numbers on a few of these things, there's significant research that's happened in Canada looking at the growing degree days accumulated before a final harvest of alfalfa. So they were doing this in 3-cut systems, and they were leaving these various different growing degree day intervals between their 2nd and 3rd cuttings. So they were leaving, in this case, between 750 and 1100 growing degree days at a base of 41 degrees Fahrenheit. They did not include fall harvest treatments in this. This was just a look at how extending that interval between cuttings affected persistence. The longer interval increased N-containing compounds and spring vigor. They also saw greater root dry matter in those longer intervals, and higher concentrations of cryoprotective sugars occurred in those cutting intervals that were on the lower end. And they surmised that came from a longer period of growth in that winter acclimating period. So they concluded that 500 growing degree days base C or 930 growing degree days base 41 degrees Fahrenheit was the best balance for persistence and following season yield based on this data that they had. So the main takeaways from all of that basically is to be cognizant of that final cutting date, but also to look at in-season cutting management. And even though we are tempted to move cutting management shorter so that we can have higher quality, we need to also be thinking about maintaining that stand for next year. And part of that can come from this final cutting interval. So if you, between your third and your fourth cutting, if you leave that 930 growing degree days, you will see a bit of an increase in the chance of persistence next year and a higher yield potential from that stand from doing that practice. We'll skip through a couple of things here just based on time. But what I want to just kind of impress upon you here is when it comes to balancing this triangle, a lot of times we take a really prescriptive approach to alfalfa cutting management. We say we're going to cut every 28 days, and barring weather events, we pretty much try and stick to that 28-day cutting schedule. And I guess I want to just challenge you to maybe think about being a little bit less prescriptive with that, because alfalfa is not a prescriptive, it does not have the same growth throughout the season. So this is a figure that shows the change in yield versus the change in quality. So as you can see in first and second cutting, we have a fairly significant change in quality for a given change in yield. But as we get to third and fourth cuttings, we're not necessarily losing the quality like we would from first and second cutting by leaving the cutting interval longer. And part of that comes from the slowdown in accumulated growing degree days that we get later in the season. As another part of it is just the physiological response of alfalfa to changing day lengths and those cooler temperatures. So if you cut on a 28-day schedule the whole year, you might actually be forfeiting forage yield that would have been at an appropriate quality had you left it in the field a little bit longer. So just want to challenge to be thinking about that, be thinking about the fact that cutting management is not necessarily just something that you prescribe at the beginning of the season, but there can be these other factors that lead into that. As well, if you're leaving this longer cutting interval between, say, the third and the fourth cutting, if you're not necessarily losing quality, but you're gaining in persistence, then you're increasing your yield in subsequent years, which is obviously a good thing for your enterprise. And then, another thing to bring up here is that we've got data from Wisconsin fields on when the majority of, or what percentage of forage yield comes from each cutting. So you can see that your first and second cuttings, both in a 3-cut and a 4-cut system, are your most significant forage cuttings. So managing those to maximize the quality that you're getting is going to be very important to getting the forage that you need for the year. And if you get low quality first cut forage like we did this year, that's a significant portion of the forage that you're going to get from that field. But if we make some sacrifices to forage yield in, say, the third or the fourth cut, it's less of our total forage than if we made sacrifices to forage quality in first and second cuts. So another thing to keep in mind there is that, even though we might be sacrificing a little bit on forage quality, it's less of the total forage yield that we're sacrificing that quality on. And I'm just going to skip through this stuff here real quick, but basically all this is to say that in your first cut, you want to be managing for quality, second cut as well for quality, and then third and fourth cut, you'll want to switch to managing for persistence because that quality is going to come along with because of that change in physiology of the alfalfa. Last thing I'll just throw in there before we kind of come to the end of this is crown evaluation. So making sure that you're getting out and actually evaluating your stands, taking a look at them as we go into the fall to get an understanding of what your stand is going to look like next year. This can be a good way to sort of see if you have poor spots in your field, if you're likely to have a good, highly productive stand next year. And we've got an article there on whether or not this stand is good enough to keep from Dr. Undersander that goes through a lot of that field evaluation there. So I think with that, I'm kind of coming to the end of my time here, and I will just leave it at that for today. I think really the main take home here is, we've had a challenging year. We had really low quality first cut in a lot of places. And if we only paid attention to what happens this year and tried to make sure that we were getting the highest quality forage possible for all of the subsequent cuttings, we might be doing ourselves a disservice in subsequent years. So we're in this window now where we're between third and fourth cut, that you can extend that interval a little bit more, get some of the benefit to persistence from extending the interval. Like I said, it was around 900 and 950 growing degree days. And if you're curious where you can find that growing degree data information, there's a link in that link tree that has been posted in the chat to the Vegetable Disease and Insect Forecasting Network tool that University of Wisconsin has. And you can pick your area, make sure you can do a custom search, make sure you pick that base 41 and set your cutting date in there, and you can see how many growing degree days you've accumulated up to this point. So that can be a really useful tool to understand better when to cut versus just using the calendar. And of course, you have to make adjustments based on rain, but now is a good time to extend that interval a little bit, gain some persistence in your stands so that you can maintain profitability next year in these stands, and also, not necessarily lose forage quality as quickly as you would if you extended the interval, say, between the first and the second cut. And with that, I think we'll open it up to any questions, Liz.